All right. Well, good afternoon and welcome to Tech Tips Live. My name is Phil Mason and I am joined by Kevin Kelly. And this afternoon we are going to be going over direct connections. We talked a lot about how you connect GainSeeker to other software systems, maybe more advanced measurement systems. But there is a lot of just kind of basic blocking and tackling, but also a lot of variation in just the direct connections. And so for many years, we have worked with Kevin and his firm, and we actually are resellers of their products. But we decided to have them join us today just to talk with everyone on today about some of the key things to know as you look to connect all types of measuring devices to software and look at what all exactly that will entail. So again, as we do a Tech Tips Live, we are live. You're welcome to ask questions. There is a question button down in the lower center. Please put your questions in there and we will get to those during the presentation perhaps, or also at the end. We also are recording this session, so we will post that here shortly on our YouTube channel and on our page. And as always, give us ideas. We have one more left in our spring series, one more next month, and then we will take a break in July and then have our fall series. So I'm very open to topics that you would like to see covered in a Tech Tips Live. So Kevin, if you would go to the next slide. Again, Phil Mason, we have Kevin Kelly here from MicroRidge. We've really kind of done the opening. We have worked with MicroRidge for a number of years, and it is a great partnership. Their devices are high quality, consistent. They are just a great way to get your data directly into GainSeeker, and they also are out in front of technology with advancing and wireless arenas and things like that. And Kevin's he's going to share a lot more information about that, and then some troubleshooting tips as well about how kind of they see it from their standpoint at MicroRidge. So Kevin, go ahead and take it away.
All right. Thank you, Phil. I appreciate the time and ability to do this. As you mentioned, we're going to talk just about direct device connections. We're going to keep it pretty basic. I just want to talk about some of the things that we're going to ask a customer when he contacts us with questions about measurement collection. How do I connect this to that, and what are the options available? Before that, just a little background on our company. We're a company focused exclusively on measurement collection solutions. So we're not a gauge manufacturer, we're not a software house. We're based out in Sun River, Oregon, in Central Oregon, about 3.5 hours southeast of Portland. The company was founded in 1983, and I'm showing you a picture of a Spark Lake, which is about 20 miles from where I'm sitting right now. Although it's probably a lot rainier up there right now. Product lines that we offer a wireless product called Mobile Collect. We have a gauge line, interface line called Gauge-Way that uses physical connecting cables. And then we have a product called WedgeLink, that's a keyboard wedge product for single gauges, and that's for getting data into programs like Excel Access, Minitab, and web-based programs. And we're not going to get too much into our products. I want to talk just about the technology behind them, but any photos you see will be of our items, so I just want you to be aware that we made these. All right, so when we're doing a measurement collection project with a client, there's 3 subjects that we really need to talk about. We need to talk about the gauge devices that you have in-house or that you're planning on bringing in-house in the future. What software application that you're using, whether you're the GainSeeker software or maybe just starting out, you just want to get data into an Excel spreadsheet or into Minitab, and then how you want to connect you get that data into that software program. What's the connection method that you're using? I'll kind of go through a little more in depth on each one of these. So starting with gauge devices, there are different outputs from different gauge devices. USB is a pretty common one. RS232 Serial, if you're a gray hair like me, you've been running into these for decades. And then there's another section that I'll call brand specific. And let's get into each one of these things. So with USB Serial, this is kind of like hooking up a printer the days before wireless. It's a direct connection to your computer. It's typically a plug and play setup. When you plug your device into the computer, it's going to recognize it, initiate or install a USB driver. Sometimes you actually have to physically install that yourself, depending on the product. We cannot hook a USB output device into any of our measurement collection products. It's a direct connection, as I mentioned. But we can use a software keyboard wedge to get the data from the USB port coming into the computer, the data coming into that port, into a program like Excel or Minitab. You can do a direct connection. You can go through USB hub. The one drawback to USB serial is that you really can't identify what the gauge is. So if you have 2 or 3 serial devices plugged in, there's no way to send an identifier. The data that you're getting out of the information package you're getting out of that particular device is all you can do. You cannot play with it all. And if you're dealing with multiple gauges on a particular workstation, having a way to identify which device is sending the information is critical to make sure the right device is used for the measurement. All right, RS232 Serial. This has been around for decades. It was around, excuse me, it was around when I got started in computers back in the early 80s. We can hook it up to wireless or to wired products. It's extremely flexible as to what we can do with it. Some of the drawbacks to serial is that there's no specific connector. You can see I've got some examples of a 9-pin and a 15-pin and a 25-pin and a circular 6-pin and an RJ45 jack and a wiring block. We run into all these and a lot of other ones. And what we need to do is we need to determine what the wiring on each one of these is. We need to know what the transmit line is, what the receive line is, what the ground line is, if there are any handshake lines involved. And so that can sometimes take quite a bit of struggling to get those answers. Once we figure them out and get the product sending data, then it's invisible to the operator. But the setup can be somewhat confusing. You have to figure out all the wiring, as I mentioned. You also have to set up the baud rate. You know, what's coming out of the device has to match the connection on the interface that you're using. You have to set up the parity, the data bits, the stop bits. So a common output would be a 9600 N81, which is 9600 baud, no parity, 8 data bits, and 1 stop bit. But there are no real output standards. So you might be changing, you might have 4 different RS232 devices connected up to your workstation, all 4 of them at different parameters. All 4 of them might be putting out different data. One might be putting out a measurement only, one might be putting out a date and a time and a measurement and a unit of measurements and the number of tests. So we need to know what's coming out of these devices because there's such an unknown quantity. Once we know that and we can talk to you about what you need out of that data stream, then we can parse that data to get you exactly what you want. One of the most common things we run into are what I call brand specific. And each manufacturer of gauges has their own format. So Mitutoyo has theirs, Starrett, Mar, Fowler, Silvac, Insights, they all have their own formats. And our products are designed to essentially be the interpreter for these outputs. We can make any of these connected via wired or wireless solutions. As I mentioned, the format's unique to the gauge device. The real difficult thing sometimes is that there are different data ports within each one of these brands. So Mitutoyo itself has 9 different data ports, 9 different data cables, actually 18 because they make a 1 and a 2 meter cable of each one. We have the same issue with Mar, with Starrett. Fowler, Silvac uses some pretty common ones, the opto, the prox and the power, the proximity and the power, but they do have a couple other ones that crop up once in a while. And then Insights is using a lot of very unusual things that we don't see in the US, like just audio jack type connectors or micro USBs, but that are wired by serial. So it's up to us to figure out how to talk with these. You simply need to let me know, hey, I've got a Mitutoyo caliper, it's a model number 500-171-30, and I can tell you exactly what cable you need. So we worked all that part out.
That's good, because when Kevin and I had first reviewed this presentation, I appreciate even just this slide. I was like, oh, this really is kind of complex and kind of a mess. I'm glad there's somebody who handles this. And I'm also a little less annoyed when we have clients who say, oh, well, we got the wrong cable. And I was like, what? How could that happen? But I understand. I have more empathy now.
Yeah, there's a lot to think about here. We actually create a little software program you can download from our website that lets you look up about 3,200 different gauges from 49 different manufacturers that we've researched, and to tell you exactly what cable and what transmitter you need for our wireless system. It's really been a help to us because customers can say, hey, I looked on your selection tool software, this is what I think I need. And it's a lot quicker for us to verify that than it is to start from scratch.
That's great.
Yeah. So when we've determined what the output of the gauges or what gauges you have, Then the question is, okay, what software are you going to be using? And to us, it doesn't matter whether it's GainSeeker or another SPC program or an Excel spreadsheet or an Access database. To us, there's two types of software programs. There's software that's designed to work with external devices to accept that data through the COM port, and there's programs that are not. And so here's some examples. Okay, so an external device software program, it's typically a PC-based quality SPC app, software program like GainSeeker. It's got the ability to monitor one or more COM ports, and it's also got the ability to parse a data packet. So when this stream comes in from a device, it might come in from a serial device and have those extra fields I was talking about. This software can take a look at it, and based on the specifications you give to your software person, parse that data to give you just the value or the values in the units of measure. Now, keyboard wedge, the programs that we most run into with keyboard wedges are Excel, Access, and Minitab. These programs are written to simply get data through the keyboard. So it's manual data entry. So we're essentially tricking the program into thinking you type that value on your keyboard, even though you were standing 5 feet away pressing a button. It's also required for any cloud-based or web-based quality applications. The reason being is that a PC-based device can be told to monitor COM3, COM5, COM7 for data coming in, and it's given in this format. With a cloud-based application, we're talking about IP addresses, not COM ports. So there's no way for the software to look at COM3 on that particular computer, on that particular workstation, that particular building. It's easier just to use a keyboard wedge product and send the data up. Data parsing, if there is any to be done, is done by the wedge product, and we have hardware and software wedges, and the right solution for you is dependent on what product you're using and how you're using it and what data you need to go with. So a little bit more about wedges. So software wedges, they install on the computer. They can bring in data, they can pass through data from a USB output device, as we talked about earlier, from an RS232 serial device, or from one of those brand specific devices I talked about. The software has to be open in the background behind like your Excel spreadsheet in order to transfer data. It not only has to be open, it has to be activated. You're actually clicking on and grabbing control of that COM port that your device is plugged into. Depending on the software program you have, you can have either limited or significant data parsing. We have a WedgeLink Lite product that has some limited software. It allows us to turn commas into tabs for the commas between the field separators, allows us to change those to tabs and drop them in different columns in an Excel spreadsheet. Now, hardware wedge, unlike a software wedge, it installs between the gauge device and the computer. So you'll have a serial cable coming from your output of your device to the input on the hardware wedge, and then the hardware wedge will plug into the computer with a USB connection. We're able to hook up RS232 serial devices. We're able to hook up brand-specific Mitutoyos, Mars, Starretts, that type. And the hardware wedge is powered by the connection, the USB connection to the computer. So it's set up to work from the 5-volt output there. The nice thing about hardware wedges is that they're always ready to transfer data. They're always on. They're invisible to the operator. He simply takes his measurement, he presses his button, and the measurement shows up. He doesn't have to make sure the software program is open in the background, that the program is taking control of the COM port. And the ability to parse is based on the model. So we have a plug-and-play model ourselves, and we have one that's also very configurable. We actually took the more popular parsing routines from our more powerful software program and built it into this. Not all of them, but the one that are used most often. So when we're connecting gauges to a computer to transfer data, there's really, excuse me, there's really only two options. You either have a wired connection or you have a wireless connection. So with a wired connection, you have physical cables. And I apologize for the icon. I originally said flexible design, and I forgot to change from a guy doing a stretch to a cable here. So you are limited in the amount of mobility you have with this device. And maybe mobility is not the best word. It's the distance you can get away from the interface and or the computer that you're connected to. So as I mentioned earlier, there are 1-meter cables, there are 2-meter cables. Some companies make 10-foot cables, but you are always going to be limited by that physical restriction. Wired connections are typically brand neutral. So we have solutions to plug Mitutoyos and Mars and Starretts and serial devices all into a same multi-gauge interface. We can hook up, as I just mentioned, RS232 devices. We can, the brand specific or the proprietary is another way of describing those. The connection from the interface to the computer software can be either a serial transfer or it can be a keyboard wedge data transfer. We have interfaces that have both those ports on it. You just plug the USB cable into the port that you need if you're sending data directly into a program that's designed to monitor a COM port, or you plug it into the wedge port if you're sending data into Excel. The other nice thing about wired systems is that they're very compatible with foot switches and hand switches. So for example, our multi-interface boxes, and virtually everyone out there on the market from our competitors, where the cable plugs in from the gauge, there's also an input for a foot or hand switch. And that allows you to do some different setups. You could have a 1-to-1 ratio of switches to gauges. So you pick up gauge 3, you press foot pedal number 3. Or you can set up a custom read sequence for that particular switch. Maybe it's when you press it, it reads all the gauges. Maybe everything's connected up to gauges that are in a fixture and you want to read them all at the same time. Or you can set it up to have a custom switch section where you press it and it reads gauge 2 and 3 or 3 and 5. Or you can have it staggered, so where you're pressing it to read gauge 1, pressing it again to read 2, again to read gauge 3. So you've got a lot of options with external switches for a wired connection. So here's a couple of pictures of wired interfaces. In the upper right, I've got a picture of our Gageway SM interface. It's a single Mitutoyo or Mitutoyo output, Digimatic output device. In this case, I've got a 500 series caliper hooked up to it. I've got a foot pedal plugged into the side of it, and it's plugged into a Windows Surface tablet. So I would simply take a measurement, press on the foot pedal, and the data would show up directly into the application I had on the screen at the time. With the multi-gauge interfaces, we all offer 2-port, 4-port, and 8-port boxes. We can chain these boxes together to have up to 72 inputs at a particular station that would plug into one COM port on a computer. The picture I've got down here has got our 4-port Gageway Pro interface, and you can see I've got an indicator, a couple of calipers plugged into the front with a foot pedal. I've also got an O-House Scout Pro scale plugged into our multifunction port on the back. I could have also plugged that into the front using an adapter cable. The front of these all have the rectangular 10-pin Digimatic connectors that have become the industry standard. So if you want to put a device with a 9-pin serial or a 15 or 20-pin serial, we have to have an adapter cable that gets us from that serial cable connector into a 10-pin Digimatic. We offer those types of things.
It is still nice to have that option on the back for something like that.
It really is. And so when you're buying a 4-port interface, you really have 5 inputs. And same with an 8-put, you really have 9 inputs. So it's just nice. That little bit extra we also use that port in the back there for when we're chaining. So when we're stacking 2 or 3 or 4 of these, we've got a serial output cable that plugs into this input you see the scale on, and that would duplicate itself on all the additional chained units.
Excellent, excellent. I'll just throw out anybody, if you have questions while we're going here, things Kevin has shown us, or maybe some particular gauging things, don't hesitate, put in the questions down there below. Great. Go ahead, Kevin.
All right. So the next option we talked about was wireless connection. So wireless it's a mobile solution. It gives you essentially unlimited mobility. You're not tethered by a cable. You might have a short connecting cable, which I'll show you later on, from a transmitter to the gauge data port, but you can pick that gauge up and you can walk across the room. You can climb up on a ladder. You're not limited by a 1 or 2 or 3 meter cable. The compatibility with the different gauges, it varies by the brand. So our Mobile Collect wireless product hooks up to dozens of different brands and thousands of different gauges. Some of our competitors have decided to stay just within their own brand, and they're very good at what they do there, but they don't step outside. With wireless connections, the industry standard has been external transmitters. You were mounting it on the back of a gauge with a short connecting cable. But the trend of the industry is going towards internal transmitters, and we'll talk about that in a couple other slides. We can do wireless connections with RS232 output devices or with brand specific, with Mitutoyo, Mars, Starretts, Fowler, Silvax. And again, our connection to the PC and the software can either be via a serial connection, it's actually a USB connection to the computer, or a keyboard wedge connection. So here's a couple of pictures of an external transmitter in the upper right corner. So the top one on the left has our MicroRidge mini mobile module mounted on the back of a caliper. You can see the short connecting cable that we use to do this. Just below that, you can see a Mitutoyo U-Wave, one of their fit transmitters for the calipers with the rigid connector they came out with a couple of years ago. Internal transmitters, you can see the one that says ANT Plus next to it is a MAR indicator, so it's got their ANT technology in there. And the Starrett micrometer down to the bottom right is one of their new DataSure 4.0 devices, so it's got Bluetooth built into it. All right, so external transmitters, as I mentioned earlier, this has been the way we've been doing wireless since about 2002, 2004. So I call this kind of a traditional solution. You have a transmitter cable. We will typically take a cable like from Mitutoyo that's a 1 meter cable. We'll cut it down to 4 to 6 inches depending on the gauge we're connecting into. We'll wire our transmitter connector onto the exposed ends, and that's what we'll plug into our transmitter. So you'll see, as I mentioned, this is showed in this picture before, that cable sticking out of that MicroRidge transmitter there started life as a 1 meter 959-149 cable, and now it's a 4-inch transmitter cable. You do have both receivers and transmitters with an external transmitter solution. So we're plugging the receiver into the data collection computer. We're attaching the transmitter onto each of the gauges. You can have multiple transmitters paired up with a single receiver. There's really no limit as to how many receivers or transmitters you can have connected to one receiver, unless you're sending a certain type of identifier that has some restrictions. And that's a channel ID. So if you're sending a user-defined identifier, this is caliper 01, you can have 100 transmitters going to one receiver. If you're doing if you're putting a channel identifier like a 01, 02, 03 that's going with each measurement from a transmitter to gauge combination, then you're limited in our system to 30. Again, with external transmitters, we have solutions for RS232 output gauges and for brand-specific or proprietary outputs, so the Mitutoyos, the Mars, and Starretts. One of the nice things about external transmitters is the range. You can get from 60 to 300 feet depending on the brand that you're working with. And where I say down here where it's brand neutral or specific, it depends on the wireless system. Our Mobile Collect wireless is brand neutral. We want to hook up to as many different gauge brands and models as possible. Others like the Mitutoyo U-Wave is specific to the U-Wave product line. They don't deal with RS232 devices. They don't deal with any of their competitors' gauges. So here's a couple pictures of external transmitter situations. So in the upper photo, I've got one of our receivers connected to a Surface tablet. This happens to be our Wedge USB-based receiver, so I can send out either keyboard wedge data or serial data by plugging into one of 2 different USB ports in the back of it. You can see how the transmitter is attached to the gauge here, and the picture right below it, that's our mini mobile module, our most popular model. And with most of these transmitters are battery powered. Anything that mounts on a gauge is battery powered. We do have 2 products that are AC powered transmitters. We use those for stationary gauges, desktop height gauges, optical comparators, might be a scale, anything you can think of that, Heidenheim digital display, something that doesn't get picked up and moved. One of these RS232 remote battery powered transmitters is a good solution because we're dealing, in this case, with a serial output device. We have all those different complex outputs we might have to deal with. So we have more parsing capabilities and we don't have to worry about battery life with an AC powered transmitter. So internal transmitters, I'm calling these the next generation. We've been seeing them come out since I think about 2016. Starrett just announced their product line in December, I believe, of last year. They have no cables. So you have a Bluetooth transmitter or an ANT Plus transmitter built inside the gauge circuitry. So that's nice. You don't, if you're using the ID jaws on a caliper, you don't have to worry about a cable loop getting in the way. You can get up and tighten the gap that you're trying to measure. As I mentioned, 2 technologies being used are ANT Plus and Bluetooth. They send data typically to applications on phones and tablets. Now, each one of these apps is proprietary. So if you're going with a Starrett product or a Mitutoyo product or a Fowler-Silvac eliminate Mitutoyo from that. They don't have an internal transmitter. But if you're going with somebody who has a transmitter built into their device, a Bluetooth transmitter, each one of them have their own apps. And I cannot send data from one manufacturer, like an Amada thickness gauge or a force gauge. I can't send it to the app on a Starrett. So you have to be cognizant of what you're trying to accomplish and what tools that you have, and make sure that you've got an app that can read all the devices that you need at that particular workstation. Otherwise, you're going to have multiple apps open on your device. If you've been doing any research on internal transmitters, you know they don't have the range of external transmitters. They're typically at 12 to 15 meters, so in the 40 to 50 foot range. And so if you're in a typical situation, that's probably going to be just fine. But there are those situations where you need to be up on a ladder, or you're measuring a fan blade on a 737 and you need to be 50 feet away and you're outside the range of that particular device. The other thing to consider is that there's limited compatibility. What I mean by that is the manufacturers are putting these products out are not at this point putting them in every single device they sell. So you're going to get them in calipers and indicators and micrometers, but you're not necessarily going to get them in something else that you might have a need, and you have to stay within that brand. So if you're going with the DataSure 4.0, you can work with their devices with the Bluetooth inside. They also have an option, if you've done any looking at the Stereo product, they actually can be compatible with other competitors. Maybe a better solution would have been, or a better example would have been the Fowler Silvac, where it's simply just going to Silvac products. So here I've got, you've got these internal transmitters, you've got these phone and tablet apps, they're brand specific, and they have a limited number of gauges that can connect. Now, this is not anything that the manufacturer has chosen to do. This is a technology restriction. So Bluetooth only allows 8 devices maximum on a Bluetooth receiver. When you're going to a phone app, you might look at each one of these manufacturers. They might only allow you 2 or 4 or 1, depending what you're doing. Some of these can go to Windows computers. If you don't have a Bluetooth receiver in there, you are buying a dongle receiver, and you typically need front-end software. Again, this is a technology restriction. It's not something that the manufacturers decided to do. It's something that they are required to do by the Bluetooth technology. Again, it's brand specific, so you can't mix and match different manufacturers sending the same receiver. You have to have a receiver from each one of those manufacturers that have internal transmitters. And I honestly don't know the answer to the number of gauges, if they're still limited at 8, or if the new Bluetooth 5.0 that's coming out allows for a wider range of gauges to be attached. That's something I'll have to learn. So for wireless comparisons companies here, so external transmitter solutions, again, you have the transmitter on the gauge, receivers on the computer. They're typically using Zigbee technology, and our MicroRidge, our Mobile Collect Wireless, Mitutoyo U-Wave, and the Stereo DataSure, the previous DataSure product, are examples of external transmitters. Internal transmitters, you've got the chip inside, you've got the Silvac Fowler product, you've got the MAR Connect product, you've got the DataSure 4.0 product that was just introduced, and they're using either ANT Plus or Bluetooth technology. The one thing to think about is when you're connecting different brands and technologies, you're going to get more flexibility in most cases with a wired connection. And all the gauge manufacturers and us all have single and multi-gauge wired solutions. We can hook up to RS232 devices and proprietary or brand-specific outputs. We have direct connection, or we have adapters to handle all these different devices. When you're dealing with wireless communication, 2 of us have open systems. It would be our Mobile Collect wireless system and the Stereo DataSure. If you look on their website about if you've read any of the brochures, they have what they call backpacks. It's essentially their old transmitter shape, or what they call their end nodes. And they have built the new technology in their 4.0 products into those devices. So you can add opto connectors, you can add quite a few Mitutoyo devices, you can add some MARs. They do have a nice range of products that you can add on there. The ones that are brand specific, you have the Mitutoyo U-Wave and the new U-Wave Bluetooth are Mitutoyo only. The Fowler Silvac are limited to those products, and the MAR Connect is limited to MAR devices only. They do have an external transmitter option with a number of different cables on it, but they are all going to MAR products. Phil asked me to talk about some of the things that we run into when we're talking with customers, specifically with interfaces, where somebody will call and say, hey, we lost our COM port. We can't figure out why the data is not transferring. Well, we have to educate the customers, letting them know, okay, when you plug that device into that particular USB port in your computer, the operating system is going to assign a COM port, COM3, COM5, COM8. You can also manually set it if you're knowledgeable enough how to do that, but typically it's an automatic assignment. So if you're not getting any data transferring, you've lost the port connection. There's a couple of reasons why. Typically, either something's happened to the cable, maybe somebody stepped on it, bent it, you've got a crack in the cable inside the housing. It could be something as simple as the port has timed out. Some IT departments have a certain timeout on these things, and they'll time out after 2 hours and suddenly data's not transferring. Nobody did anything for 2 hours, the port times out because there was no activity, and now they go to do it, they have to reboot the computer to start it. One of the other issues we see quite a bit of is that the USB cable was actually removed. So somebody unplugged it for whatever reason. They were moving a computer, moving the device, they plugged it back in. They plug it into the same port, Windows recognizes it and leaves the COM3 designation. If they plug it into a different USB port, it's a new device on a new port, and Windows is going to assign a new COM port, but your software is looking for COM3, but you're now on COM5. Yeah. So the solution to that is either unplug it, put it back where it was before, or you have to open up the software and you have to point it towards the new COM port, and you have to save that so you can now transfer data. And about the port timeout, that's something IT department sets so you can have them change it on your device or have them eliminate it altogether because it's something you're running into a lot. We've had some
IT departments that are getting tighter with security.
Right.
Some of those security, like even logging people out or just those types of things that they, the old days of you plug a machine in and you got it going for days at a time are over.
Yeah, they truly are. They truly are. A couple other things I wanted to talk about before I end this. We have a lot of, we're using data cables to connect either in a wired or in a wireless situation with our products. And I just want people to understand, like, these cables are not designed to be incredibly durable. I put fragile up here, but it's more like they're not really durable. We have people walking around holding them by the cable and swinging them around just because they're bored. They'll hang them on a hook on the cable. Some of them have data buttons. The data buttons have a life expectancy on them. They're going to get so many presses on it, and none of the manufacturers will tell you what those number of presses are, and mostly because they just don't know how hard the button is being pressed. And we have a lot of situations where cables come back and the people they press on them, and if it doesn't send the data because they've lost the connection because the COM port is timed out, they think the solution is to press the button multiple times or press it even harder. So that's going to cause a problem. The other thing we have is people that want to share data cables between different gauges because they're compatible with the same, Mitutoyo caliper cable, for example. So they're plugging and unplugging them. And these are not durable connectors. There's 6 brass leads on them and a plastic housing. We've seen the plastic broken off and the leads dangling. We've seen the leads bent. But just one thing to be aware of is just these cables are not designed to be abused. They will not take that abuse, and you'll be replacing them consistently if you are not as gentle as possible with them. That's one of the reasons people switch from wired to wireless. They've had these cable issues, and wireless seems to mitigate those more because you're not putting that stress and strain, picking up a cable that's 1 meter and trying to move it to 1.25 meters away.
Yeah.
Foot pedals and hand switches, we talked a little bit about this earlier, but they're really compatible with wired interfaces. There's a data port next to every input, and you can do a lot with them. There's some real limitations with wireless. So we've got a couple of transmitters that are compatible with external foot pedals. One of them I have to plug into the receiver. So I have to be within the length of the foot pedal cable, which is a 6-foot cable, when I'm doing my measurement to press the pedal. And I can only control one transmitter. If I've got 3 transmitters on the station, I can only control one of them, or I can control all of them, but I can't choose between 1, 2, and 3. So we do have some significant limitations. Now that may be changing with the way the industry is going, but we haven't been able to find a Bluetooth solution at this point that is consistently operable, so we kind of stay away from that at this point with wireless. The one thing that people don't really think about is that you can actually combine wire and wireless in the same building. The software doesn't care. It simply wants to see the data being presented at the COM port in the format it's expecting so it can accept it. So if you have station A is all stationary devices, use a wired solution. If you have station B is going to be a lot of mobile, you can put a mobile wired external or internal transmitter solution there. You could even have different manufacturers at different stations. As long as it's presenting the data information, or the data packet as we call it, to the COM port for the software in the format it's expecting. And the last thing is the thing that causes us more issue than anything else is just the operators. They get curious and they start pressing buttons, they start pulling cables, they start getting into software, they start trying different things. And suddenly we're called by the quality manager saying, hey, this has stopped working, we can't figure out why. And it's usually a simple fix. We typically, if there's some specific program we've set up for that company, we save a backup either in our servers and hopefully on their servers, so we can go get that and reinstall that software, get them up and running. Sometimes though, we have to rebuild everything and start from scratch.
Yeah.
So that's
Great.
just about everything I wanted to cover. So go ahead, Phil, I'll let you take over.
Yeah, so I've got a question for you, Kevin. So from Justin, he asks, are there solutions to the timeout issues beyond extending the time or getting rid of logout settings? Our IT won't go any longer at this time.
Not really. And I'm not a computer expert, so I would default to your IT people. If they're saying they can't go or won't go any longer, there's really not much more you can do about it, because we're plugging into that device and the operating system of the device we're plugged in is setting, that is what's controlling the COM port. Our devices have no control over it at all.
I mean, could I throw out one idea?
Absolutely.
And you can banter with me on this, is one idea is to go away from serial or USB and go to keyboard wedge. Does that,
Yes.
I mean, does that help us or not?
Yes, it does, because you don't have a live serial connection where you're
Yeah.
controlling the COM port. The difference is we're sending a packet of information versus individual characters. So what a keyboard wedge product is taking, it's taking that packet that says 3.25 a space and M for milligrams, and we're turning it into individual numbers and letters. And so that port is always live. It should not be a timeout situation at all in a keyboard wedge environment.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's kind of give and take on that.
And the other thing, maybe say one more thing here. You can send data into any program with a keyboard wedge solution. It doesn't have to be a serial connection to the GainSeeker software. You could send a wedge connection to it. The serial connection gives you the ability for bidirectional communication. So you could send a read command out to the device through the interface and get the value back. You cannot do that with a wedge. It's from the gauge device to the PC only.
Good. Okay. Excellent. I just want to reiterate something that you brought up and I wasn't aware of, and maybe I'll talk to you later and we can maybe get that on our website or even send people a link, is that selection tool that you have. That's great.
Yep.
It's always helpful to have people, some of those things. And I think I appreciate kind of your help there, Kevin, of the pros and cons of proprietary solutions versus kind of third party and their openness. And,
right.
You know, we're a company, I think a lot like yours, that people are like, well, can you connect to that? And we're like, you bet we can.
Yeah. The whole idea is to give the customer the ability to pick the data collection application and the gauge devices that best suit their needs, regardless of the brand. Mm-hmm. And that's what we're trying to do here. We're not trying to put square pegs in round holes. We want to give you a square hole for your square peg.
Yeah. Yeah. Excellent. All right. Once you flip, I think we should have a last slide. Yep. Our next Tech Tips Live is June 17th, and we're going to be talking about hosted GainSeeker. So our current program, taking it from an on-prem to using the term the lift and shift and putting it in the cloud. And, you know, there are some caveats, just like Kevin talked about gauge interfacing and some of those things when you do that. But we also have a number of clients who are working in this environment very successfully. And Hertzler, we have a new partnership with a hosting partner to make this happen. So it's something we'll be talking about next week. We will be posting our recording here shortly. Appreciate everybody who joined us today, and doubly appreciate, Kevin, you joining us and bringing us your knowledge and what you're doing at MicroRidge. We appreciate you guys so much as a partner, and thank you so much for your input and bringing your expertise today.
My pleasure.
All right. Thank you all. See ya.